listening to the Red Book Show on Wexford New People's Movement Radio, which means it must be a Tuesday night and you have no social life. But thanks for listening in. You might also be listening to us on Spotify or some other podcast provider, providing they haven't banned us. Now, our Director General Tony is trying to teach us about those things so that we don't say anything that could get him into trouble. And I don't think we've mentioned this week yet what a horrible, horrible piece of shit Jeff Bezos is. But just so you all know, he is. Now, it's time for another Dr. Huennekes Almanac.
All right. First of all, let's go into Zen Master mode with a couple of haikus. These are from Farewell to America. Both of these haikus were dedicated to Kenneth Boulding, and you may not know who he is, but we'll talk about who he is. The first one is called North America. A sprawling, brawling frontier town fighting it out from here to China. The second one is called Europe, a fragile spaceship where there's a journey within for both young and old. Both of these dedicated to Kenneth Boulding, and you may be wondering, who is Kenneth Boulding? So I'm going to tell you a story about the olden days, back when I was here, okay, in the early 1980s. I worked as a newspaper reporter for a newspaper in Denton, Texas, in USA. It was 1983, and every day I wrote stories, and in the evening people read them. A lot of people in the area read them because that's what people did. They read newspapers back in those days. Now, I had a newspaper editor, my boss. His name was Keith Shelton, and I really respected him a lot, but he was an interesting character. One thing about him you noticed right away is one of his ears was twice as large as the other one. And he never talked about that, and nobody else talked about it either. He was there on the day that JFK was assassinated. He was working for the Dallas Times-Herald, and he was covering that event. And he didn't believe in anything about conspiracies. He said Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman. I didn't quite follow him in that. I didn't agree with him, but we never argued about it because he was there, so I respected that. Now, one of the things Keith did is he put these little Post-it notes around. Like, for example, Safeway is having a special on Coca-Cola, do story PLS. And some of these things were just ridiculous ideas for news stories, and I begrudgingly went and covered them, but didn't really want to. Then one day, I got a Post-it note on my desk, and it said, Kenneth Boulding is speaking at the Lyceum at North Texas State University. Go there and cover this event. I thought, who is Kenneth Boulding? I've never even heard of this guy. So anyway, I went over to the Lyceum and sat in the audience, and the guy came out there. Now, nobody ever talked about him. By the way, Kenneth Boulding lived between 1910 and 1993, so he was in an older generation. The first thing I noticed, and it didn't distract me too long, but I had to notice it right away, he had a terrible stuttering problem with his hard C's and his K's. He sounded a bit like Claudius in I, Claudius, where you go, cut, like that. Now, I'm not criticizing him, but I will say that he would have never had a career on YouTube these days. He couldn't have possibly made a video that people would actually read. But his audience was very respectful, even almost reverent. I thought, okay, this guy must have something to say. And it took me about 10 minutes to realize, yes, this guy has a lot to say. He gave a talk on how things are going from bad to worse. That was the title of his talk. And he spoke in these general statements that just kept landing and kept landing. I said, this guy, he knows so many things. I stopped thinking about his speaker and delivery. He looked sort of like Ben Franklin, and he was just as wise. Later on, I learned that he was renowned in the economics profession, sort of an eccentric. He was a poet out on the fringes, but all highly respected. I also learned he wrote about 40 or 50 books about economics and topics that economics connected to. And whereas some people get really narrow and they write about the same thing over and over again and just go in more depth about it, every book he wrote was about something totally different. And also just very, very insightful. I'll give you an example just off the top of my head. He wrote a book called The Three Faces of Power. and about how power is exercised. So insightful. He said one face of power is threat, another face of power is exchange, and the third face of power, he said, was the integrative or love face of power. And each of them were different. Threat involved power over. People told you what to do and they bossed you around. Exchange power was power to. It gave you opportunities to do something in your life. And the third one was power with, where you worked with other people in a cooperative manner and like on a team, for example. I love that book. Now, he wrote a book called The Meaning of the 20th Century. He had the audacity to write this book in 1965. He was ready to describe the meaning of the 20th century, and a third of it still had to go. But it was an extremely insightful book. I came to think of him as the professor from the future. He talked about something called the invisible college, where visionary thinkers would basically be loosely affiliated but somehow connected with each other, if in no other way, by a spiritual sense. And they would be aligned against people outside the college, greedy and manipulative bastards with an interest in stopping the invisible college. So that got my attention. Then he wrote, the following year, he wrote something called The Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth. He wrote about something called the cowboy economy and the spaceship economy. He reconceptualized all of economics, and we haven't even absorbed the shock yet of his insight. For example, do you think of economics as resources and goods, input and output? That's how most people think of economics, but they ignore a third of the equation. So he reconceptualized it as input, throughput, and output. And what he did is the input was what we know resources. That's the input. Throughput was the products that we create from the resources. Output, instead of being something good, it was something bad. It was the pollution and the bad effects from our production. So he said that the cowboy economy doesn't really care about anything with output. They'll create all kinds of waste. They'll do whatever they want. They'll destroy a place and move on, head west, just like cowboys did in Westerns. And I think today of the billionaire class. They're in the cowboy economy. They don't really care about the prospects for the world and the environment or other people. They just want to they're like the villains in a Western, like the person who comes in and says, I'm going to run the town and I'm crooked as hell. They're going to shoot you if you try to be a good guy. On the other hand, he talked about the spaceman economy, which was basically the perspective of an astronaut. And he said that the people at the invisible college were aware of the problem that astronauts have about the output. And this is where it gets to be very important for our world today. You ever see the movie Apollo 13? Do you remember the scene, and this is one of my favorite scenes in all of movies, where somebody comes out and lays all this crap on a table, and they got to solve a problem that the astronauts are having. What are the problems that the astronauts are having? They're having a problem with their exhaust. They're actually exhaling more than they're putting in. So they're slowly, basically,
losing fuel.
They're losing their environment because they're putting so much exhaust in their environment that it won't be able to breathe anymore and they'll die. But they're astronauts, they're way up in space, right? So how are you going to solve that problem? They went and collected all the pieces that could possibly work in their spaceship. And somebody had said, why don't we use something else? And the engineer said, because that's what they have. And they can't get anything else out there. They have to solve the problem with this. We have to solve the problem for them because they're running low on consciousness. They're becoming to be loopy and they won't be able to solve the problem themselves. So in about a day or so, however long it was, they actually solved the problem of this exhaust. And that's like the invisible college. Now I want you to imagine Apollo 13, instead of having these people who are really, really intelligently focused on the problem, who were trained to be the engineers to solve the problem, clear out all those people and put a bunch of YouTubers in there to solve the problem, who don't have any basic knowledge or education about how to solve the problem. That's where we are today in this world. We're at the point now of not being able to grapple with their own problems because people are greedy or people are ignorant or whatever it is, and they're all so powerful. Well, Boulding would be right on all of this. He wrote some more books too, by the way. He wrote a book about oil, and he talked about how oil, we all know it's a non-renewable resource. He said, discovery of oil in 1859, it's somewhere in Pennsylvania, was a worldwide invention. It made like everybody crazy because all of a sudden they had this source of wealth that they'd never had before, and they got drunk on it and delirious on it. And for the next few decades, we've all been delirious about oil. Now we realize it's running out. It's like we've emptied the footlocker of all the treasure that was in the basement, and everybody goes, what are we going to do now? Whip out the credit cards or something like that. So anyway, more about Kenneth Boulding. He was just a very congenial guy. I met him and sat at a card table with him for about 20 minutes. He patiently talked to me, and I said, I wanted more information for my story, and I asked him a bunch of questions. We were on a stage, like for drama stage, behind a curtain, so it's just me and him sitting at a little card table talking for about 20 minutes. Wow. I'll never forget that. Yeah. And then I had a second meeting with him about, I don't know, almost 10 years later at Kansas State, where he was coming, and I knew he was coming. I knew who he was. I said, I'm going to sit next to him at the lunch table with all the graduate students. And I bullied my way in there and got there, and we had another conversation. It was not quite as meaningful, but still fun. And I went to a symposium he gave in the afternoon. I said, I'm bringing a big, long legal pad with me, and I'm going to write stuff that he says right out of his mouth. And it was so fascinating. He said this. He said that the threat power is symbolized by the fist. Exchange power symbolized, now this is the 20th century, right? Writing a check, that's exchange power. So he said, he was talking about demonstrations he was seeing in the Middle East where people were going down the street saying death to America and so on, but they all had their fists in the air. Yeah. And I'll never forget Kenneth Boulding. He says, well, he goes, if you have your fist in the air, you can't write a check. Like that's what he said. And I thought that was his wit right there. So what I'm going to do now, bearing in mind the spaceman economy and the cowboy economy, you tell me which economy is which. I'm going to reread those two haikus now with more insight. First haiku, North America, a sprawling, brawling frontier town fighting it out from here to China. Spacemen or astronauts?
Oh, I'll let Shane answer that one.
Oh, thanks for that, Wally.
I'll read it one more time.
Yeah.
A sprawling, brawling frontier town fighting it out from here to China. Does that sound like sci-fi or Western?
Sounds like both, honestly, a little bit.
Hint, frontier town.
I guess
Western. Like a Western, yeah.
It's like a Western. And intentionally so. And that's insight right from Kenneth Boulding. This one's called Europe. You tell me now, astronauts or cowboys? Europe, a fragile spaceship where there's a journey within for both young and old.
I'll let Wally answer this.
Astronauts.
There's the astronauts. Yeah, that's where Boulding was coming from. That's the Invisible College. The Invisible College had philosophers, scientists, and people like that who were in the know. And what I fear happening right now, we keep railing about the billionaires and the social media and all of that. I fear the people who are in the Invisible College are just not heard anymore. And it's actually a critical problem.
Yeah.
So with that, I forgot the music. The music is supposed to go.
Don't need music statement.
Yeah, I'm going to do the music next time. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
so that's all for Dr. Huennekes' Almanac.
Thank you, Dr. Huennekes, and you're listening to the Red Book Show on Wexford New People's Movement Radio. And thanks to Steve for once again lifting things up to a higher intellectual level and allowing me to drop it even farther off the skyscraper back down into the gutter. Shane, Steve, Tony, listeners, have you ever noticed the way sometimes books can have very obscure and bizarre titles?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have a little competition now. We're going to do one in the studio first, but then we're going to have one for all the listeners at home. And the winner, whether here in the studio or at home, will get a 3-month membership to the Jeff Bezos Lonely Hearts Club. So here we go. I'm going to give you the titles of four bizarre titles to books. 3 of them exist and 1 of them doesn't.
Okay.
And you're both going to have to tell me the one that doesn't exist. So first, colon cleanse the easy way, exclamation mark. Second, I won't be a nun. Third, sheep shearing for mindfulness.
Okay.
And fourth, play with your own marbles.
Okay, well, I happen to know one of them that exists. Now, I could be wrong.
I thought I saw you with a copy of
I
colon
think I
cleanse the
know
easy way.
one of them too. Yeah.
Sheep sharing for mindfulness, I believe, is one. I've actually heard of one stranger than that.
Okay.
I can't remember right now. If colon cleanse the easy way is absolutely believable, Steve.
Yeah, I'm going to go with colon cleanse.
Now remember, only one of these books doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I know that.
So you're telling me the one that
book
doesn't
exists.
exist.
When I say colon cleanse exists.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you say, so tell me the one that doesn't exist.
I won't be a nun.
I won't be a nun.
What was the fourth one again?
Play with your own marbles.
I'm going to go with play with your own marbles. Because I always go for the red herring. It sounds like it could be a book, but I just think it's not.
Okay, so Steve is going with play with your own marbles, and you're going with I won't be a nun.
Yeah.
Okay, well you're both wrong. The book that doesn't exist is Sheep Shearing for Mindfulness.
The one I actually thought was real.
Oh, I thought that was real.
You had one behind the counter and read books.
Something very similar, but maybe you could write that book, Shane.
All right.
Maybe you could write that. For all you listeners at home, a chance to win a 3-month membership to the Jeff Bezos Lonely Hearts Club and to have your title read out next week on the Red Book Show here on Wexford New People's Movement Radio, Tuesday 7 to 9 p.m. Come up with your own bizarre title of a book about the disappearance of Agatha Christie. And let me give you an example. Agatha Christie, Agatha Crazy. So there's your example.
Okay.
So send your send your entries in to, well, send them in to me at Red Books, or send them in to us. If you see Steve walking down the road, shout at him and throw a can of beans out the window at him. Or give them to Tony at Wexford New People's Movement Radio before next Tuesday night, and you can have a chance to win a 3-month membership to the Jeff Bezos Lonely Hearts Club. Maybe you'll find love, maybe you'll find something else.